Well, we shall get started. Azman Kotzer v'hamalocha meruba, thank you for joining me. I'd like to start with a what might appear to be slightly left of field. I want to paint a picture of two different Yidden on Shabbos. One, the first one, is somebody who focuses very heavily on knowledge of Hilchas Shabbos, and he is incredibly aware, he or she, doesn't really matter, they are incredibly aware of the ease in which, if one doesn't constantly review and know Hilchas Shabbos properly, as the Mishnah Berurah brings in Hakdama to Chelik Gimel, it is virtually a given that if somebody does not constantly learn and review Hilchas Shabbos because they are so complicated, it is inevitable that one will chas v'shalom be mechalel Shabbos on a weekly basis. Scary thought indeed. So this person, our first person in our analogy, puts an inordinate amount of effort into being very careful with what they do on Shabbos from a halachic perspective. On the other hand, there's a downside. This person is not very much taken with what you might consider the ruach or the spirit of Shabbos. So they have a very fast Shabbos meal. They hardly sing any Zmiras, or they don't sing any Zmiras. Maybe they say a Dvar Torah, maybe they don't. They have a nice shlof. The thing where they put all of their effort, if you like, is in Zehirus, in being very particular and careful in the minutiae, the details of observing Hilchas Shabbos. That's person one. Person two is kind of the other side of the extreme of the spectrum, and they are very what they would call today nowadays very spiritual, and they feel Shabbos, and they spend hours and hours on the Zmiros and on the Divrei Torah perhaps, and on all of the different other aspects of Shabbos, which one might call the I don't know, the touchy-feely, the feeling of Shabbos, and they create a ruach Shabbos like none other. But when it comes to the dry, boring minutiae of halacha, the fish from the bones from the fish, give me a break. And they don't put any particular emphasis on this. Now, it goes without saying, this is not about giving a prescription about how to keep Shabbos, but for the purposes of this analogy, we have person A, who is pretty much at one end of the spectrum, who puts no effort into what we would call the ruach of Shabbos. On the other hand, is very careful about halacha. And on the other hand, we have somebody at the other end of the spectrum who puts all of their emphasis on a Shabbos experience and warmth and a ruach, but really puts no effort at all into zehirus of Hilchas Shabbos. Which one is closer to the essence of Shabbos? I'll let that's not it's a rhetorical question. Let's let that question hang there. And we'll see, hopefully, time will permit tonight, we will get to see why this is relevant. I'm using this as an analogy because tonight we're going to learn some stuff which I'm afraid is quite subtle. And let's see how far we get. So we left off last time with the 6 concepts of the Ramchal. The first one of which is Hashem's existence, where he talks about it in terms of believing and knowing. The other 5, he says you have to know. And we asked, just recapping, perhaps for those who just joining us, this is a series. I think this is 4 or 5 in this particular series, and it's I hope, worthwhile looking over them. And we said the following idea, and this is what we want to spend a little bit of time on this evening. And we said that the last 5 concepts, and let's just go through them again quickly. The last 5 concepts, again, we're doing Chelik Rishon, Perek Aleph. The last 5 concepts, which are Hashem's shleimus, that he is perfect, that he must exist. He is the only thing that is it is imperative, more than imperative. It is he is the only thing that has to exist. Everything else exists b'mikra. You or I, the table, the laptop, it doesn't have to exist. There's only one thing that must exist, that's Hashem. He's mukhrach, his metzius is mukhrach. That is point of these 5, that is point number 2. Point number 3 is that his existence is non-contingent, that it is not dependent on a prior cause. He is a priori. He is simple in the sense of not being murkav or being a composite. His essence is, again, not his essence. Sorry, I'm not going to go over that again. We never ever talk about his essence, but he, as he wishes to be known to us, is, even though his rotzoin is Ein Sof, but he is Poshut. And then finally, and we are suggesting most importantly, is Yichudai. Yichudai is the last of them. And all of these 5 attributes can and must be approached through the following avenue. And that is why they are those which he says you must know, because they are approached through I'm going to say philosophical, maybe we will qualify that as we go a little bit later. They are approached via the shlili. These are attributes or qualities of Hashem that are almost defined by negative, by their opposite. Any positive quality of Hashem or attribute of Hashem, given that he is totally infinite. And when we say he is infinite, again, I'll say this for the last time this evening. I think I should probably say it once every shir, and that is, even he, as he wishes to be known to us, even he, from the perspective of relationship to us, is also Ein Sof. And therefore, if we want to talk, for example, about his chokhmah or his chesed or any other quality or attribute, by definition, it is unknowable because it is infinite. And however close you get, you are equally an infinite number of steps away. So you would appear not to have achieved anything, and therefore it's not a derech, it's not a mahalach, it's not how can I go about this? And the answer is that we talk about attributes and qualities of Hashem whose very definition is by negating their opposite. So for example, the first in this series is shleimus. He is sholem. He is whole. He is perfect. And that is to negate any imperfection from him. And that can be done. There's no negative infinity. Although, as I pointed out in maths, there is, but for our purposes, there is no negative infinity. By negating, by being shoylel, any imperfection that we can possibly conceive of any sort, we have thus asserted, and we know. How we know is another story. We've spoken about that through Ma'amad Har Sinai, etc. But we know, therefore, that he is Sholem. Does that mean that I have an understanding of his Shleimus? Of course not. Of course not. It is impossible. But I can truly affirm it through, and I want to be careful here, because if you look in secular philosophy, there are various different ways of coming about this, and I deliberately don't want to go down those route, via negativa and all the others which earlier philosophers talk about. We're going to come at this from Torah sources, and that's really, really important, because otherwise you end up in all sorts of weird dead ends. We are shoylel when we talk about ta'arei, tof, aleph, the to'arim, attributes and qualitative, descriptive attributes of Hashem, and also vis-a-vis his pa'ulos. And here again we get into interesting ground. Rabbi Yehuda Chosid in Sefer Kuzari, Rabbi Yehuda Levi in Kuzari sees things broadly like the Rambam, but again slightly different. We're not going to learn him. We're going to tonight look at the Ramchal, and most importantly the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim, and maybe some Maharal if time permits. And that is, all of these things are achievable. They are accessed via the negation of their opposite. And thus we can approach Hashem's perfection, that he is the imperative of his own existence. And most importantly, as we pointed out from the Das Tvunos last time, is Yichud Hashem. Because Yichud Hashem, and here we will give the answer to the question that I posed last time, which I don't think we fully or totally answered in any way, which was, given that all of these qualities are accessed via negating their opposites, what makes Yichud Hashem so special? Why does it stand out over and above the others? And the answer really lies in the fact that we saw very clearly from the Ramchal in Das Tvunos, the source sheet was attached, it's still on the YouTube link if anybody wants, because Yichud Hashem is the negation of evil and lack of knowledge and understanding, and that is the tachlis. That is the tachlis ha'olam. And that is what we're working towards by Yom Ha'hu Hashem Echad U'Shemai Echad, which means that in very simple terms that we will be able to equate the interaction with us, which is Shem and Haga, with who he really is, even in terms of relationship to us. We'll be able to be Meshalev and put the two together, and that will be Gilo Yichudai, which was the purpose of creation, to hide it temporarily. There appears to be this illusion called evil, etc. And through approaching Yichud Hashem and living a life of Yichud Hashem as much as we can, that is Tachlis Habriya. Fine. Given all of that, we're going to look at a couple of lines in the Ramchal that have really set out the stall, and then we're going to go a little bit deeper. And possibly tonight we may uncover what would appear to be differences of approach between primarily the Rambam and possibly the approach of Kabbalah, and with the Maharal perhaps finding us a way kind of in between, that there's no real machlekas, so to speak. Okay, so if you have the Derech Hashem in front of you, and I didn't put it up on the screen, I probably should have done, I didn't copy and paste it, but I'll read out a couple of lines, and then we'll switch straight to the Mer Nevuchim. Says the Ramchal, V'ulam, Dvarim Eileh, Yodanum b'Kabbalah min ha'oveis u'min ha'neviim. The truth is, these 5 things, it may include the first one as well, Metzias Hashem, but these things, we know it b'Kabbalah. We know it through our received tradition, our Masorah min ha'oveis u'min ha'neviim. V'hisigum kol Yisrael b'ma'amad har Sinai, and we, ata horeis aladas, ki Hashem hu Elokim. And again, where's the focus? Ein oid milvadoi. There is no other. Again, that's exactly the point, that we understood Yichud Hashem through the negation of any other essential force. And we realize that Hashem, so to speak, as Chazal say, cut open the 7 heavens, and we saw v'hisigum kol Yisrael b'ma'amad har Sinai v'omdu al amitosom bebeirur. That should be a very challenging phrase. We achieved the clarity and the emes of these ideas. How's that possible? How can you possibly, let's just stop there for a second and ask a very simple question on the Ramchal. How is it possible to understand these ideas about Hashem, amitas in yonam, the truth? And the answer is very simple, like we said, because all you need to do is negate any other. You don't need to understand. It is impossible to understand Yichud Hashem, and the fact that there is an entity that is the imperative of their own existence, is outside of the realm of cause and effect, which we are so limited by. And therefore, it would be an impossible demand on us to understand that. It is actually impossible. And yet, we saw. Because what did we see? The as Moshe says in verse Hanan about Ma'amad Har Sinai. That what? Einoid? And as Moshe Rabbeinu goes on and on in those prokim, Dalad and Hay, in Dvarim, Lo re'isem kol temuna. You saw nothing. All you saw was Rabbeinu Shalom, there is nothing else. You realize there is nothing else. How that operates, it's actually beyond, it is essentially beyond us. But we knew that there was no other. And that's all you need. That's what it means by being oimed ala mitoson bebiru. V'limdum livneihem doirach ador kayem hazeh. And this is the basis of our Kabbalah and our Masorah, which we handed on. Shekein Sivom Moshe Rabbeinu olav hashalom mipi hagvura, because we were commanded to do so. Pentishkach es hadvorim asher ro'u einecha. We spoke about this Ma'amad Har Sinai at length last week. I'm not going to go on about it. And then he says something really surprising. And for a number of years, I didn't understand this. I think now I have some level of understanding. And he says the most interesting thing. Omnom, gam mitzad hachakira b'moifsim halimudim ye'omsu kol ha'inyonim ha'ele. It is possible to arrive at the same conclusion through your intellect, through using knowledge in its broader, I don't want to say secular sense, but meaning not Torah per se. Chakira b'moifsim halimudim ye'omsu kol ha'inyonim ha'ele. These things can be demonstrated to be so, to be true. V'yuchrach ha'yosam kain, and that they must be so. From our understanding of things that exist, things that we can observe empirically. And here he even spells out which branches of classical wisdom we should refer to. Al pi chachmei hateva, hahandosa, engineering, tchuna, ushara chochmos, geometry, astronomy, ushara chachomos, shemehem tilokachno hakdomos amitios. You may truly derive a priori principles, hakdomos, introductions, which axioms, the technical term, which are indeed true. The truth is, he says, you have another route. There is actually another route. Fascinating. Besides for Kabbalah, from the Avos, from the Nevi'im, from Ma'amad Har Sinai, for these ideas. He says, I'm not going to spend time on these now. I will explain to you the introduction to these ideas, and I will organize them on the basis of our tradition. So he does not negate more than that. He actually says, he offers this up. And maybe sometime we'll do a study. You have to see what the Ramchal says in other places about this. But he indicates very clearly it would be possible to be oimed on the truth of these concepts from classical wisdom, so to speak. But we're not going to do that. We're going to use our Masorah. Right. Let's stop here now. And let us begin to delve into the Rambam is probably the most famous. I'm going to share my screen now. The Rambam is probably the most famous source for this, and we're going to, and I hope you should be able to see the screen now. Right. So we're going to learn a few bits of Moreh Nevuchim. It may look quite long, but I'll skim through the bits which I think are relevant to us, and we'll discover some, I hope, some pretty amazing stuff. So the Rambam, this is an idea, I don't know to what extent you are familiar with the schema of Moreh Nevuchim, Chelek Aleph, where he talks about words and terms in Torah and what they mean, and scattered in various places throughout Moreh Nevuchim, but most concentrated here in Prokim, Chelek Aleph, Perek Nun Ches to Perek Samach, is the following idea that I've been mentioning, which is the idea of negative attributes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, meaning negating the opposite to arrive at emes. And here he fleshes out his perspective in an incredible way. So really, there was a lot to be gained from this. So let's run through some of this. He starts off Perek, source 1 over here. Moreh Nevuchim Aleph Perek Nun Ches. He starts off fascinating, little Akdama. He says, Omo ki yoser min ha'omor ad kai. Let's go a little bit deeper. Hatzogas Teiras Teirei Hashlila. Now, actually, this text which I found online, it differs slightly from the version that I use. I use the Mosaddar Rav Kook one, although there is the Kafich one, and there are slight differences because, of course, it was written in Arabic, and the Ibn Tibbon's translation has been critiqued to some extent with some bits and pieces. By the way, some of this is actually quite important. I'll just mention this as a maybe a bit of a throwaway remark, but it is quite important. I have seen Torah written, and I think we even mentioned it right at the beginning when we spoke about HaKadosh Baruch Hu's existence, whether the mitzvah is to believe or to know, and a number of Mefarshim discuss the fact that the Rambam would appear to contradict himself in Sefer HaMitzvahs. He says Ha'amonas Elokus, and in Sefer Hayad he writes Leda, to know, well, which one is it? And they've got all sorts of shtiklach Torah. Rav Kafach demonstrates quite clearly that it's not in a precise translation, and in both cases, in both sources, actually the correct word and the correct translation is Leda, is to know. So these things are important. Be that as it may, let's delve into the text. He is now going to explain to us what it means, toyare hashlila, to negate any opposite of an attribute of Hashem, and what's the advantage? Da. Sheteur hokel yisader v'yisroimem b'shlilus. You should know. I'll try and do this quite quickly. You should know that describing Hakadosh Baruch Hu negatively is the right way. Hu atir hanochain. It is the right way to approach it. She'enil ve'elov shum idiuk. Because in simple English, you can't really go wrong. V'she'en b'chisaron b'yachas la'el klal ve'ika. You can't go wrong with this way. Whereas ve'ilu b'tiyura of chiyuvim, if you're going to create positive definitions, so we're going to talk about his wisdom, and we're going to try and define Hashem's chokhmah or Hashem's chesed, then yesh, there is, k'moshe bi'arnu, as we already have said, and as he's going to say a little bit further, there is shituf v'chisorim. You get into all sorts of hot water, let's put it that way. And now let's move on. Okay, so he's laid that out. Now he asks the most amazing question. The next parak Nuntes, source 2. Yochel hashoyel lishel. One could ask the following question. Since it is an impossibility to truly fathom the depth of Hashem's, the truth of his existence, given that we've described all of this and we've said, therefore, we've got to go down the route of negative. In other words, Hashem is one, for argument's sake. How do we arrive at the understanding of Hashem, Yichud Hashem, which is crucial, by saying there is no other? The definition of Echad is ve'ein sheni. There is no other. There is only Hashem. Well, if that's the case, Keitzad yeh hevdel b'ma'ala min hamasikim. How is it possible that there be a qualitative difference between different people who arrive at the same conclusion? This is an incredible question. She'im kain, ma shehesigu Moshe Rabbeinu u'shloimai hu shemasig kol echad min hatalmidim. He says, if you're going to say that all you need to do, and in fact all you can do and may do in terms of achieving an understanding of Hashem's yichud, for argument's sake, if the only thing that our only mahalach is to negate the opposite, well, negating the opposite, surely Shlomo HaMelech and Moshe Rabbeinu negate the opposite, and so do I, so do little me. And therefore, is there no difference in our appreciation of Hashem's yichud? Chas v'shalom, are we able to say that Moshe Rabbeinu and Shlomo HaMelech, their understanding of yichud Hashem, given that it is defined by negating the opposite, surely in that respect we're all the same? Does it therefore follow that we have the same level of understanding and appreciation, madrega, and understanding yichud Hashem? He cannot accept this, says the Rambam. It's an incredible question, because if you define Hashem in positive terms, then of course, once you're talking in positive terms, I have no doubt that Moshe Rabbeinu's appreciation of Hashem's chokhmah, or Shlomo HaMelech's appreciation of Hashem's chokhmah, given that he was chocham mikol adam, his understanding of Hashem's chokhmah would be way beyond mine. But that's only if we're utilizing positive definitions. The minute we are using, all of our definitions are negative, we are negating the opposite, then what's the difference between Moshe Rabbeinu and me? So he says, well, maybe, let's go on. He says, therefore, surely there cannot be any advantage in Moshe Rabbeinu, Yitzro and Shalechad al Re'eu. V'harei mefursam, who said, maybe taka. No way, he says. V'harei mefursam etzel anshei hadas. It is evident amongst people of religion, v'af etzel hafilosofim, sheha'hevdelim b'mala hazehim rabim. It is self-evident that Moshe Rabbeinu's appreciation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's attributes would be far beyond that of the average person. How can that be so, given that the understanding is negative? The definition is negative. It's an amazing question. Look at the answer. Hatshuva, the answer is, Ramot hashlila mekarvot lahasagas emes. The level and quality of negation brings close to the understanding of truth. This is the most, if I was a teenager, I would say this is the most insane idea in a positive sense. And I'm just trying to be exuberant and excited about it because it's something to be excited about. Dalacha, shakenhu adova. No, says the Rambam, that this is indeed so. Of course, there is a gulf of understanding between a simple person and a sophisticated, deep understanding of a Moshe Rabbeinu or a Shlomo. Ki kechol shematarim yoser es hamatuar, kachu misyached yoser. The more and the better that one is able to have an understanding of that quality or attribute that you are dealing with, to that extent, you are closer to that which you are describing. We get closer to the essence of the understanding of that particular quality. And therefore, the deeper, and this is the key, this is his yesod, the deeper, and this is such an incredible Torah idea, the deeper and the more you are able to negate, the more meaningful your negation of anything other than tiskarev lahasoga v'tihiyek korov elov yoser. You are closer than from somebody who doesn't have any real understanding of the negation of what he's really doing. Misibozu. And now he gives us three people. We've got three people in front of us. Aleph, there's one guy. Yesh adam omal shonim rabbis kedei lahovin madam masuyam. You know, we live in the age of specialization. There are people who specialize in ever narrowing fields of academia, of research, of understanding. Imagine somebody who puts his koiches in for many years to understand something and to verify, and to verify the axioms, the ideas, the principles, until he has a clarity in something, whatever it is. And he then uses and utilizes his deep understanding of, I don't know, physics. It doesn't really matter. And his deep understanding of a brilliant and structured concept, whatever it is, and he then negates that. He then says Hashem is not that. He is above that. He is not that. He is then able, from a very sophisticated vantage point, able to negate from Hashem inyan mesuyim, an aspect of that which he knows well, and it is clear in his mind that it is impossible that Hashem is that thing which he knows oh so well. That's person Aleph. And then we have person base, va'acher, min ha'misrashlim be'iyun, lazy guy, lo yuchach lo yadova. It's not absolutely clear to him, elo yetzle besofek, not too sure. Not too sure whether Hashem has aspects of this particular thing. That's base. And Gimel is worse off. If Acher or somebody else, me'ivore ha'havana, somebody who makes a toast, he makes a mistake. And he's going to give an example. He's going to give an example. The third guy is somebody who actually gets it wrong. So Aleph, first guy, is a person who has a deep understanding, and a missionary comes up to him in the street and says, I don't know, starts talking about Jesus, starts talking about Yoshki, and he is able on the spot to demonstrate Hashem's incorporeality. Because he knows what guf is. He's delved into it. He knows what the capabilities and the limitations of a human being are, and he knows there is no way the Borei Olam can have a guf or a masigei haguf. But that comes from an understanding of what corporeality means, its extent, its limitations, its parameters, its essential understanding. And therefore, from a position of understanding, he can absolutely, with confidence and with clarity and with eloquence, he can negate that Hashem doesn't have a guf. And he says, as he says in brackets, as I proved in Meiravuchim Chelik Beis Perek Aleph. And then there's another fellow, Base, the second guy in our Moshel, the Acher, Yistapik, I don't know, don't think so, but I don't know, maybe. And of course, he's referring to the statement that he makes in Yad, and then the Raavad, the famous Raavad over there, who says that there were Rabbim Ugedolim Imenu, there were people bigger than the Rambam who were prepared to countenance Hashem's corporeality in some interesting sort of sense, and that's another whole topic. But the others will don't know, haven't thought about it, not sure, don't know. And Gimel, somebody else who says, yeah, I think Hashem can have a body. Yeah, he can make a stone that he can't lift, and all this sort of sophistry and whatever. The Acher, and the third guy, the Gimel, Yifsek Shehu Guf, V'yifke Shesoel B'Amunazu, and he thinks this is, Hashem does have a body, Chas v'Shalom. Says the Rambam, Ma Rav HaHevdel Ben Shloishes Ha'anoshim Ha'ele. What a vast gulf of difference, of understanding between these three people. Harishon, and here are beautiful words. Fridge magnet, we're definitely into fridge magnet territory here. Harishon hu belisofek hakorov beyoser lo'el. V'hasheni rochuk mimeni v'ashlishi rochuk yoser. And it's the same lashon in the kafech one. I just want to check to make sure, because yes, exactly the same lashon in the kafech, which is slightly more accurate version. Hine kamo hevdel ben shloishes hanoshim harishon belisofek yoser korov el Hashem. Listen to the depth and the beauty of these words. The first person is closer to Hashem, and I want you to appreciate the it's not an irony, and it's a bit of a paradox, but it's an incredibly important yesod that emanates from this Rambam. And we're going to go back to what we started with this evening, the two people who kept Shabbos, and I hope you'll appreciate the analogy. And in a minute, I'm going to tell you another Maral, who is closer to Hashem. Do you know how you get close to Hashem? By having a deep understanding of what he is not, negating that. And you would think that that would create distance. It doesn't. The deeper, the more sophisticated, the more grounded your understanding of the thing which you then negate from Hashem, that Hashem is beyond this which I have an understanding of, and he's above, and no way, he has no connection to it at all, and you think that you've put distance between you. Not so, says the Rambam. This is a Yesod Godol. Harishanu b'lisofek hakorov b'yosel lo'el. You've just become closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The first person in our analogy, I forget which way around I said it, but the first person in our analogy who Shabbos Kodesh me'en olam haba, something that is ruchni, Baruch Atah Hashem mekadesh HaShabbos. HaKadosh Baruch Hu took his special holy day and as an act of love gave it to us. We have no hasaga what Shabbos is. Olam haba, we don't know olam haba. Olam haba isn't even mentioned in the Torah, says the Maral in Gvuros, so maybe we'll get to it. Hakdama Aleph, one of the many, many answers is because you cannot describe in Torah that which you cannot conceive of. Nevi'im are limited, that's why Chacham Odif Minavi. Nevi'im are limited to things that they can at some level see and conceive of, but an Olam Shekulei Toiv, Shetzadikim Yoshvim V'Itroseim Barosheim, a world which is of Ruchnias, Lodas, Lodeo Es Hashem, can't be in the Torah. We cannot conceive of Shabbos. Do you know how we connect to Shabbos? By not doing Malacha, by creating distance. There's 39 ways Hashem he forges this spiritual neural network, this cosmic network, and he connects to us. He is Mekadesh HaShabbos. The only thing we have to do is make an oral declaration called Kiddush. Zochreihu Zechiras Shevach v'Kiddush. That's all we can possibly do. And then we can sit in awe and trepidation, not a year of being afraid, but acknowledging the awesomeness and the transcendental nature of Shabbos, and endeavoring not to sever chas v'sholom, one of these 39 connections, through asiyas malacha. And do you know how you get closer to Shabbos? The essence of Shabbos is by not doing the malacha. Whereas the second guy, of course, might think that he's chapping malachim, but if he's not makbid on Shabbos, on Hilchas Shabbos, boy, is he far from Shabbos. And that is such, in and of itself, is such an incredible concept. It's heartening because it gives us a way in, and it answers the Rambam's question, the Rambam's question at the beginning. And I want to give one more analogy for this concept because it's such an important one. And this is from the Maharal in Netzach Yisrael Perek Beis, where he quotes a beautiful Mama Chazal. Chazal tell us that the luchos were 6 tefachim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu held on to 2 tefachim. There was a tug of war. It's another whole very interesting discussion. There was a bit of a tug of war, so to speak. Kivyochel. Moshe Rabbeinu held on to 2 tefachim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu held on to 2 tefachim. And there were 2 tefachim be'emtza. There were 2 tefachim that was neither, so to speak, Hashem holding on to, nor Moshe holding on to. These are the 2 tefachim in the middle. Freg the Maharal asks the Maharal, what are these 2 tefachim in the middle? Do you think you understand, asks the Maharal, what these 2 tefachim in the middle are? You're not Hashem's shochen, you're not his friend. You're far from him. There is a chelek be'emtza. And when you appreciate and you understand that he, by definition, is above and beyond anything you can possibly conceive of, when you acknowledge and you give the due reverence to the chelek bo'emtza, then you realize that it is that chelek bo'emtza that is mechaber, that joins the bit, which is the province of Hashem, and the bit, which is the territory of Moshe Rabbeinu. If there is no chelek bo'emtza, if we do not understand that there is this merchak, yiras shamayim, which is why the Maharal says in a number of places, why in a number of senses, yiras shamayim is above that of ahavas Hashem, even though, maybe not to go into it this evening, even though perhaps in the order of midos, we start with yiras Hashem, it is true always, and you can progress to ahavas Hashem, but it is very clear that even when you have ahavas Hashem, which is, of course, closeness and connection, but you still need to have yira. We say, la'ahava uli yira es shemecha. She'ein hayore boyet, as the Yerushalmi says, because somebody who is fearful, there always has to be this awareness of the distance as a remez, perhaps. I'm not sure to what extent it's the concept of shockling is, again, represents this idea of ahava and yira, and ahava and yira. And this is something that is, the duality within that relationship. Both elements have to be present for an appropriate relationship. And here, the Rambam tonight in the Moreh Nevuchim has demonstrated that it is the very distance. He's taken it even a bit more. It's the distance that creates the connection. The more that a person has an understanding, a sophisticated understanding of the concept, whatever it is, and then he negates attributing any aspect of it to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the temptation is to think that I have created distance. You've actually, that very understanding of the distance is korev b'yosel okel. You're closer. Yeah, let's go on. That in itself is it's an incredible idea, very, very important idea. Let's take this a little bit further. Next bit of the Rambam, a little bit later in the same perek, Moreh Nevuchim perek Aleph, Chelik Aleph perek Nun Tes, he says as follows. He says v'hahoilem biyoser, the bit which is in bold. I don't like that word very much. The Kafich edition says v'hayoser bohir, the clearest expression of this idea, he says, is the posuk in Tehillim, L'cha dumia tehillah. To you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, silence is the biggest praise. Perushai hashtika legabecha hi hashibuach. Being quiet is actually the greatest praise, because if the silence, now there are different types of silence. There is the silence of despair, depression. There is the silence of, and then there is the vayidoim aharoin, which is not just an acceptance, but a realization that Hashem is above and beyond, and therefore l'cha dumia tehillah, which then leads to a question about davening, which we'll come to in a second. Because however much we would try to praise HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it will always be, by definition, we will be insulting him, and there will be a lack. Al-kain hashtika adifon, therefore, to be silent actually is preferable. V'yesh lehistapek b'masha hascholim masigim, like Commissioner Tziva, imru bilvavchem, al mishkavchem v'doimu selam, be quiet. And here he goes on and he brings the Gemara. And he explains the following Gemara, famous Gemara. Says the Gemara in the next bit. It's 3 lines down. There was somebody who went to daven as a shliach tzibur in the presence of Reb Chanina, and he said in Shemona Esra, Hakel, Hagodel, Hagibur, Hanoira, Ha'odir, Hachozik, Hayorui, Ha'izuz, and he started, as we say in English, waxing lyrical and just going on and on and on about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Omle Reb Chanina, and you can hear the if I may say so, the dripping sarcasm, the cynicism. Have you quite finished? Have you finished? Have you finished? Meaning, have you reached the apex of all of Hashem's praises? You got there? No, that's why you're quiet now, because you keep going. What are you doing? Hashta anantlas kamisa. He says, we, the first 3 phrases, Hagodol, Gibber, and Noira. Ilmole da amrinhu Moshe Rabbeinu. He notes here 2 separate factors. These 3 things that we say about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Godel, Gibber, and Noira. If it wasn't for the fact that A, Amrinu Moshe Rabbeinu said them, they're in the Torah, and B, that's not enough. And then subsequently, the Anshe Knesset Agdola came along. They were Nevi'im, Mehem Kama Nevi'im, 120 Zekanim, and many of them were Nevi'im, and they fixed our nusach, the nusach of our tefillah. If they had not done those 2 things, we would have no license. It would be wrong to say them. And therefore you just want to act as some sort of poet and just keep spouting forth your own phrases, which are A, not in the Torah, and B, you have no license to say? We wouldn't be able to say them. What do we see from here? Says the Rambam. Because, of course, he's asking a question on his own, on the principle that we've been learning this evening. Here, we are enumerating positive aspects of Hashem, and we are praising him for things which are positive. Godol, Gibor, and Noira, these are positive attributes. Godol is not defined by being their opposite. You can't say Godol is which means Chesed always. Gedula is Chesed. You can't say it is defined by the opposite of Chesed. Which now we're running into real trouble. He's almost asking a question on himself. Says the Rambam. 2 things. Let's just cut to the chase because I want to move on. He says, Imkain, Toiref ha'amira hazu. 2nd paragraph, let's have a look at. He says, we have 2 imperatives upon which our tefillah is based. Number 1, shehinemru b'Torah. They're in the Torah. We would have no license to say it, but Hashem himself has said it about himself, so we have the right. And secondly, Shanavim Sidrus HaTfilah Bahen. Imkain, therefore. Lule ha'hechrach harishoin. If it was not for the first factor, that it's in the Torah, lo yahayinu mazkirun oison, we wouldn't be able to say it at all. Velule ha'hechrach hasheni, and if it wasn't for the second one, lo yahayinu motziin oison mimakoimon, we would not extract them from the Torah, and we wouldn't use them within the context of tefillah. Hare hisbarer lon chol gam kim ladvarim eila. Shaloi kol ha'torah mamiuchosim l'Hashem shetimtzu b'seifrei hanavim. You can't just take willy-nilly any attribute that we find in one of the sforim of the Nevi'im and we can use them for tefillah. It's only because of these two concepts. Otherwise, they would actually be, we would be unable to utilize them. What we have, hopefully, again, there is more to be said on this topic, and the Rambam says more, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi says more. There are some differences of approach a little bit, possibly to Rav Chazdai Kreskas and Rav Albo in the Sefer Ikrim, but broadly speaking, we have put forward this idea, which the Derech Hashem, the Ramchal seems to be going along with, which is, I'm just trying to see whether we should, yeah, maybe we'll just start the next bit. And that is these, to reiterate, these 5 attributes, which are a must for every thinking Jew, is, and here now perhaps we can elaborate on this just a little, and that is, one needs to understand. Let's take one of them, for example. Let's take the first one. The first one, which is shleimusai, right? That he has no chisoron at all. Ein amitas mitziusai, says the Derech Hashem, museges lezulosai klal. Nobody other than him can know anything about him, and that is even he as he relates to us. The only thing that we can know is shehu motzu sholem b'chol minei shleimus. What is the avodah now? What is the avodah for a thinking Jew to achieve this das of shleimus? And this is where really we need to begin to think. How do I negate? What is the way and the depth of negating any aspect of chisoron to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? That means I look around the world, I look around all the things that I'm able of conceiving of, and anything which I conceive of as being imperfect, that is not Hashem. Now, I have to be very careful how I say this, because I wasn't intending on saying this evening. We are talking about Hashem as he relates to us within the world. We're not necessarily at this stage talking about his pe'ulos or what he does. That is primarily the province of the last one, which is Yichud Hashem, which is the negation of the appearance and the illusion of evil, of Ra, which is why it is so important, because it's the biggest challenge of all. Okay, so here we're talking about Hashem as he interacts with the world. Is there, we can ascribe, there is no imperfection to him whatsoever, no chisoron. Hashem is sholem in every aspect of shleimus. Now I can have no understanding of the of any positive understanding of his shleimus. Only thing I can know is no chisoron whatsoever, no lack, total perfection. And that, maybe that needs a bit, maybe we'll talk about that possibly another time. And here tonight, I think I want to, I suppose time is running on, is I want to raise a question. I want to raise a question, and that is, there is an appearance, and this is something that I find myself, it's really quite strange. I find myself falling into this. I really didn't plan to do so. In coming across what would appear to be a fundamental difference of approach between the Rishonim and those that use, let's say, philosophy for want of a better term, in approaching understanding of Hashem and Avodas Hashem. And then something happened, and we need to be very aware of this. It's really important. Round about the time of the Vilna Gaon, give or take. And here's a very interesting thing, and I think it's important that everybody is aware of this. The Talmidei Hagra and the Talmidei Baal Shem, or let's talk about the Nefesh HaChaim and the Tanya, for example, in many different things, they diverged. In many different concepts, in approaches to Avodas Hashem, and even without even going into the so-called the machlokas or the rejection of Chasidus, etc., by the Vilna Gaon. But there was one thing, and here's the fascinating thing. There is one thing in which they find absolutely common ground. And in Hashgacha, when we talk about Hashem relating to the world, I'll put it in very simple, crude terms, in his involvement down to the tiniest little detail. Hashgacha protis down to the teeniest little detail. There would appear to be the very thing which the Rambam and other Rishonim would appear to say, that if you believe this, you're a fool, and I use the word very clearly because he says that very thing, the Vilna Gaon and his Talmidim, and the Mekubalim, and the Tanya, and the Gedolei HaChasidus and others down to this day, say absolutely 100%. And there appears to be, on the face of it, this big gulf and this big dichotomy. In my not so humble opinion, I don't think it is true. There is no, I'll explain what I think I mean by this is. And I found myself finding the same thing when we're talking about these qualities and attributes of Hashem. Because when we look into, for example, Yichud Hashem and the approach of, we probably won't get to it tonight, but I've put here the source 5, a Nefesh HaChaim, and source 4, a Nefesh HaChaim, a Gimel Perek Zayin, and source 5, the Tanya, just as an example, they would appear to talk about Hashem's attributes of Yichud, not in the sense of negating, but viewing Yichud Hashem to some extent as a positive attribute and something that we can grasp onto. And they would appear on the surface to be a divergence, but I feel that it's actually the same resolution of the apparent machlekas. When talking about Hashgacha, it's exactly the same. And I'll try and explain it in very brief terms as follows. I mean, there's some very powerful examples of this. If anybody's familiar with Avram Fried, has two Yiddish albums, the Yiddish Oitzrus, where he sings some of the songs of Yom Tov Erlich, and there's one about the verimel, the worm, the little worm, and a fellow goes up to the malach, and he wants to know, why did the wind blow? Why did the leaves go like this? And the leaf fell off the tree because there's a little worm down there. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants that little worm. The sun was hot, and the verimel schloft zis, whatever. It's the very thing. It's almost the same example, which, if you look it would appear to be possibly even Pesukim in Eov, talking about fish, and the Moreh Nevuchim, they would say that if you feel that HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Hashgacha goes down to that level of detail, you're a fool. And they use that word. So what's going on? The answer, and I think this is very, very important for a sophisticated understanding of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and his interaction with us. There are two, as I've said, there are two levels. There are two worlds. These two worlds, these two dimensions is probably the better way to put it. These two dimensions exist side by side. And if you live in one, you cannot understand the other. It's not possible. If you live in one, you are so subject to all the limitations of that world, you cannot know anything about the other world. But it is important to know that it exists. The Ramchal, in essence, wrote an entire sefer about this. Philosophers call it the paradox between Hashem's immanence and his transcendence. In Kabbalah terms, it is soivev kol almin umamale kol almin, or makif and or pnimi. He is both encircles and enwraps all worlds, and he is also intimately involved down to the tiniest detail. They're both true. The Ramchal used in Das Tvunis, this is really what the whole Sefer of Das Tvunis in essence is about. To use his nomenclature, it is Hanhogas HaYichud and Hanhogas HaMishpat. Hanhogas HaMishpat is what we experience. It is the world of action and reaction, in which every action has a prior cause. And you're good, and you get rewarded, you're bad, and you get punished. And then there is another world which exists in parallel, Olam HaYichud, a world where there is only, a dimension where there is only Boirei Olam. and from the perspective of Olam HaYichud, from the perspective of Hashem's essence permeating, this, the depth of it is that this is actually all part of his, that which he is above and beyond anything we can conceive of, because at the same time, he is both intimately involved down to the tiniest little detail. And at the same time, it doesn't negate the integrity of a world where there is action and reaction and cause and effect. Do I understand what I've just said? Not a clue. It's not possible. In the words of the Arizal, b'mokim yediyah in bechira, b'mokim bechira in yediyah. They're both, but they both exist. They have to both exist. They exist in parallel, and until we get to that place, that dimension, and we experience by Yoimahu, Hashem echad u'shmo echad. Until then, it is not possible. But we need to know. The Ramchal is telling us here, tzorich sheteida. So in the world of Hanhogas Hamishpat, all we can do is be shoylel, negate anything else. But there is also a world which is the world the Nefesh HaChaim talks about and the Tanya talks about, because we have to understand that at the risk of trying to be over clever, there is hashgacha on hashgacha. There was a special hashgacha that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as part of the pathway to Geula, allowed to be revealed things about this deeper dimension from the world. The Zohar says from the year Tov Reish, Niftachu Shari Chochma, from the year 1840, Shari Chochma were opened, and it was allowed that which before could not be revealed, could now be revealed. Of course, it went to the wrong side as well, and you had evolution, and you had all other stuff. There always has to be Zelu Mazeh. But from now, we have access to a deeper understanding of Torah, and this is what the Nefesh HaChaim and the Tanya talk about. And of course, they're both true, and they both exist in parallel. And I think that's kind of the Mahalach, even without understanding it, because it's not actually possible. But that is the Mahalach, which maybe we'll look at a little bit more detail next week. And the Maral, perhaps we'll find other Marals to use to synthesize both these truths. The Ramchal, of course, is emes. We are shoylel, as the Rambam says. We have to negate. And the more you negate, the closer you get. At the same time, there is the understanding of the Nefesh HaChaim and the Tanya and others that it is that the yichud of Hashem we can appreciate within this world and have some sort of positive connection to it as well. I hope that wasn't too esoteric. I do apologize if it was, but I hope that was of some value. I will attach this source sheet, Emetz Hashem, to the copy, to the video of this, and we'll continue Emetz Hashem next week. Thank you all so much for joining me, and bleib gesund, as they say over here. Stay safe. Call to. Good night.